Hello everyone, I'm Mike Barrett, Branch Chair, Reform UK, Sussex Wealden, and I'm joined today by Arthur Kay, one of our very own constituents here, and we're going to be talking about global warming, climate change, many of the iterations, and I'm sure that during this conversation we'll come on to that. This is our first in what will become a series of podcasts, and we're always going to be looking for more of our constituents to come forward on their mastermind subjects and have a conversation with us so that we can shed light and actually start spreading some truth against those narratives that we seem to get in the mainstream media. So one more thing before I let Arthur introduce himself. Arthur is the founder of CO2.watch, which I'm not sure if this is going to get into view, but you can see there's a website there. We will make sure that that is in the descriptions. Please do go on there, check it out, read some of the articles for yourself, and let's start talking about climate change, but not from a negative perspective that we all get colder and poorer. So, in fact, one more thing, I'm going to be playing at times during this a lefty. I'm going to be putting out the mainstream narrative at times and asking Arthur to challenge that. So if I say something that is against reform policy or anything like that, I'm just in character for those moments. So Arthur, if I can ask you to introduce yourself, what's your background and how did you come to found CO2 Watch?
Thank you very much, Michael. Yes, my name is Arthur Kay. I'm a retired businessman. I trained as an engineer many years ago now, so I have an understanding of particularly thermodynamics, because I had thought that I might be developing engines when I was very young. I got involved in this because it became apparent to me that a number of the claims and projections being made by so-called climate scientists, particularly in the 70s and 80s, hadn't come true. And there were various statements made like, if we don't stop emitting CO2, the climate will change, it will increase in temperature, the sea level will rise by 3 meters, London, Washington, New York will all be inundated, and this will happen within 10 years. Well, 10 years went by, and the temperature may have shifted a little bit, and sea level may have risen by a couple of centimeters. And lo and behold, London and Washington and New York and all the other cities and areas that are low-lying are still intact. So I began to wonder, and as I looked into this further, it became clearer and clearer to me that the whole concept of anthropological climate change, anthropogenic climate change, I should say, is nonsense. The science simply not only does not support it, it argues very strongly against it. So how have we come to this point? The mainstream media have been promoting this message for years. And many climate scientists have produced mathematical models, computer models, that predict rapidly increasing, unstoppable, catastrophic climate change, temperature rises, and none of these models have been able to predict with any degree of accuracy what's actually happened. Now, one of the fundamentals in science, as I'm sure you know, is the scientific method. The scientific method requires that if you make observations and then you make a theory to explain those observations, then you have to check that theory against all observations relating to whatever it is you've been observing. And you must not exclude information that goes against your theory. That's called cherry picking. You just cherry pick the data that supports your argument and you ignore all the rest that proves that it's nonsense. And that's pretty much what's happened here. Data has been cherry picked to show some correlation between carbon dioxide levels and temperature. But that's only existed over the relatively recent past. If you go back into geological time, there have been times when CO2 levels have been far higher than they are today. In the Ordovician period, we estimate there was 7,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And lo and behold, there was an ice age. So there is no long-term correlation between carbon dioxide levels and global temperatures.
I think just to pick on that last point, I've taken a few notes as we've gone down. Correct me if I'm wrong, but CO2 levels currently are at 420 parts per million, up from about 280 before the Industrial Revolution.
Yes.
You just said that there was a time where it was at 7,000.
Yes.
Why are we panicking?
Why indeed? Why indeed? You can draw inferences, and you can look at what causes carbon dioxide levels to increase. And there are several things that cause that. I mean, the ocean can outgas. It's got a lot of carbon dioxide absorbed and dissolved in the ocean waters. And if the ocean gets warm, then a lot of CO2 gets emitted. But that's a result of warming, not a cause of warming.
Yeah.
The real danger with drawing inferences from correlations is correlation does not equal causation. My little dog is an animal with 4 legs. An animal with 4 legs is not necessarily a dog. So we have to be really, really careful here. And if we look at the full range of evidence available to us, we can see that there is no correlation between carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere and global temperatures. In fact, most times there was the reverse relationship. When CO2 levels were high, the temperatures were low. But that seems to be a random occurrence. There are other times when the CO2 levels were high and also the temperature was high, and vice versa. So we have a sort of random set of data dating back to the Precambrian period, 500 odd million years ago. And that shows absolutely, scientifically, clearly, without any shadow of doubt, that there is no correlation between CO2 levels in the atmosphere and global temperatures.
And that's really interesting. While we're on the subject of timelines, one of the articles that I could understand most in my simplistic brain on this topic was that there was a timeline, and it was talking through. We had an ice age, and then it came out of it, and we had a mini ice age, and there's that kind of ebbs and flows of effectively climate change. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about that, your understanding of it, and what science is backing that up, that ultimately, and the point I'm trying to get at here is that climate does change regardless of man-made interference, if I can call it that. It's just the world evolving.
The climate changes, you're quite right. Anyone who says that climate change doesn't exist is clearly wrong. The climate has always changed. As far back as we can measure, the climate has always changed, and it's been much hotter and it's been much colder than it is now. So what we're experiencing now is nothing unusual. The other thing is, what causes climate to change? Well, lots of things. There are various cycles that range from half yearly to every 140,000 years. The sun varies its output. The Earth's orbit around the sun is not circular. The Earth's axis tilts. All these things affect the climate. Volcanoes erupt. They produce a lot of smoke and gas into the atmosphere, which reflects sunlight, and the temperature drops down. A whole raft of natural phenomena occur, and to say that the understanding of climate is settled is complete and total nonsense. You have two turbulent systems. You have an atmospheric system, which is turbulent, and you have a liquid system in the sea, which is also turbulent, and the two are interacting together. And turbulent flow is virtually impossible to model. And when you've got two of them going and interacting with each other, forget it. That's why our weather forecasts are so poor.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we can't even forecast what the weather's going to be like a week from now, let alone
We can't do it right now. I looked a few hours ago, it was supposed to be 20-something degrees and sunny, and it is overcast and actually fairly cool. So
that's it.
These things are unpredictable.
They are unpredictable, and the other thing to keep in mind is that cloud formation is part of that turbulent flow system, and cloud formation has a huge impact on global temperature. So
there's a really interesting point there, and I'm not sure if what your knowledge base is like, but we'll test you. Cloud seeding, big conspiracy, big players. I won't name drop because I'm not paying for legal fees, but big billionaire players in the world apparently are paying planes to go over, effectively release chemicals.
Yes.
Which, if chemicals are being released, that's not good for me. That's not good for my son. That's not good for my dog. It's that's a worrying thing. But you're saying obviously around cloud formation is actually something that can trigger further climate change. Is that right?
Yes, and it has a much greater effect than CO2 levels. Perhaps I could develop the CO2 issue and greenhouse gases, because we talk about greenhouse gases as though these are bad things. And they're not really, because without them, the temperature of the world would average about 16 degrees Fahrenheit. And right now, you and I would be sitting on a 30-foot ice sheet, which might not be too comfortable.
Yeah, definitely not.
So greenhouse gases absorb heat that would otherwise be reflected back into space and keep us a little bit warmer. It's like a blanket. So what are those greenhouse gases? Well, the most important is water vapor. Water vapor does 95% of the job of greenhouse gases. 95%. Yet water vapor is ignored in the climate models.
Oh, interesting.
Isn't that interesting? Why would you ignore something that does 95%?
Surely that's, I used to be an analyst, not obviously scientific, but if I had something that was a statistic at 95%, that would be the first thing I'd go looking at.
Yeah, wouldn't it just? But the reason that it's not included by convention is because it's very difficult to model, turbulent flow and all that. Whereas CO2, being a gas, is easier to model. But CO2 only plays a minor role, less than 3% in terms of climate warming, of warming the atmosphere. And it's almost reached its saturation point. Now, I have to explain how saturation works, but heat is infrared energy. It's like light, it's just at slightly longer wavelength. This visible spectrum goes from all the way red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Violet's the shortest wavelength of visible light, red is the longest, and infrared is longer still, and that's where heat is in the infrared spectrum. And different gases will absorb spectral lines differently. So water vapor absorbs a whole mass of them. Carbon dioxide absorbs some of them, and it can absorb, and water vapor and all the other gases can only absorb up to their point of saturation. If you imagine taking a sheet of red cellophane and sticking it over your eyes, everything you'd see would be red, because the cellophane would absorb all the other colours of visible light. Now put another sheet of red cellophane over your eyes and things look pretty much the same. You might see things a little bit dimmer because the second layer has absorbed a little bit of red light, but by and large, all of the absorption will have already been done and it can't do any more. It's not going to shut off the red light. Same is true with carbon dioxide. It's pretty much absorbed all the heat that it can because there isn't any more in those wavelengths. There is a little bit more that it could do. It could probably absorb another, few percent, 2 or 3%. It might make a difference of a fraction of a degree Fahrenheit or centigrade, either way. But it isn't going to make a colossal difference. And the more carbon dioxide we add to the atmosphere, the less additional effect it will have as we approach this saturation effect. So once again, science shows carbon dioxide isn't going to cause catastrophic runaway global temperature rises. Can't.
So it can't cause catastrophic, but I
Yeah.
guess or an argument from the opposing view would be, but it's causing some. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it's probably causing if you removed all carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, so there was none, the temperature would probably fall by 5-6 degrees, something like that. Adding more from what we've got now will make a very small difference.
So looking back at historical trends, I think it's fair to say it is warmer now than what it has been. However, records only began, I don't know the fact here, but records only began at some point, probably pre-World War II. So we're looking at less than 100 years of records.
Well, actually, temperature records do go back a bit further than that. The sort of reliable temperature records involved something called a Stevenson screen. You may have seen these, they're boxes with slats in, and you have a thermometer inside, and it keeps it away from direct sunlight, and it's a certain height above the ground because you don't want high reflectivity from the ground to disturb the reading. And the highest reading ever recorded, properly recorded in a Stevenson screened thermometer, was back in 1913 in Furnace Creek in California, and the temperature measured was 56.7 degrees centigrade. Never been exceeded.
Okay.
Never. So if we're having global warming, how is it that hasn't been exceeded?
And obviously with that timescale, you would expect it to...
Yeah, 1913 wasn't far after we started emitting lots of carbon dioxide through industrial processes. So the carbon dioxide content in the air at that time was much lower than it is now.
Yeah.
So there again, that points to it isn't a causative factor. Other things are that the lowest temperature ever recorded was, I think, back in the 1980s in Antarctica, so that's reasonably recent. One thing about temperature measurements is that the measurements that are being used now to show that temperatures are rising, and they are, I think they are, that's true, but not much, are satellite-based. These satellite-based measurements average the whole of the global temperature, and that's why they're saying, the whole Earth is increasing, rather than, we might have a hot spot here, but it's compensated by a cool spot somewhere else. But overall, they're saying that the temperature of the whole globe is increasing. Now, we've only had satellites doing this work since about 1980. So the time span is seriously short, especially in geological terms. It's nothing. So it's first of all, it's too short a time span to make any real conclusions about. The other thing is that these satellites measure according to a huge matrix of data over the Earth, and the matrix areas are quite large. So they could miss a particular hot spot or cool spot. Take my garden. I have a walled vegetable garden. It's 2 degrees warmer in my walled vegetable garden than it is outside.
Because it's containing the heat, and the brickwork is in
That's
the
right.
same way that you expect your house to retain heat through winter when you put the heating on, if you dare with the prices. But you do that and then you hope that there's a couple of hour periods that the bricks are going to save you effectively. So it's the same principle, right?
It's the same principle, but if you imagine that a satellite looked down and measured the temperature in my vegetable garden, it would be 2 degrees hotter than the area around, so it would be a misleading reading. So you've got all these uncertainties going on about global averages, and also, of course, the satellite readings themselves have to be calibrated. There has to be calibration factors added. Also, we are changing other things. I mean, we're taking down trees in the Amazon. We're building roads and putting up lots of houses, especially in this area.
Yeah.
And that absorbs more heat. I mean, if you go out on a hot day without any shoes and socks on and step on a black road, it'll be really hot.
Of course it will, yeah.
Whereas before they put the road down, there was grass, it wouldn't have been hot.
And this is why they say not to take dogs out in hot weather. It's not, to my knowledge, and I'm not trying to be an expert in this, but it's not because of the temperature and the dog's inability to breathe as such. It's to do with their paws, isn't it? And because
they lose heat through their paws, and if their paws are on dark surfaces which are heated up, then they can't lose heat. Yeah, that's quite true. So there is an effect that we're having by building stuff and building buildings which tend to absorb heat more than grassland and trees and stuff do. But that's nothing to do with CO2.
Yeah, I find the irony of the whole argument around climate change and things like that, with the gigantic leaps in population rises. I'm going slightly off piste, but because we're building 1.5 million homes in a 5-year period, according to the government, you're taking away green space to create the vast majority of those homes. So is their argument undone by the fact that they're saying that we need to maintain the green spaces to take all the CO2 out of the thing, which is obviously something that they, and again I may be completely wrong, but it's like a food to them, isn't it?
Plant more trees.
Plant more trees, but they're actually removing it, building more houses, building more infrastructure when they bother, but in the shape of roads, which is then giving that, to your point, that facade that actually we're getting hotter.
Yeah. Whereas we are causing, to some degree, some climate change by what we're doing, which has nothing to do with CO2, like building lots of buildings and roads and what have you, and deforesting the Amazon and various other things. So there's that going on, which strictly speaking has little to do with CO2, although deforesting the Amazon means that the trees are reduced to absorb the CO2. Now, CO2 has more than the function of being a very minor greenhouse gas. It's also plant food. Now, if we were to reduce the carbon dioxide level back to pre-industrial norms of around 280 parts per million, we would probably reduce agricultural production by about 30%. That means that right now we can probably, without too much waste, we could probably, with our current agricultural systems, feed about 10 billion people. We've already got over 8 billion. So there isn't a big margin to play with. If we drop the amount of food we can produce by 30%, that would be pretty serious.
That's catastrophic.
Yeah. And if we stopped pumping natural gas, we would not be able to make natural fertilizer, synthetic fertilizer. And it's estimated that synthetic fertilizer at the moment is responsible for feeding half the world's population.
Wow.
Take that away, half the world starves.
That's scary. We've come on to another interesting topic that, again, the left, or whatever we want to call them, frame them as. Temperature increases reduce food security. Interestingly, and quite timely, yesterday, so just for those watching, this was filmed Monday the 11th of August. I think it was yesterday or the day before. There was a study commissioned by, I believe, Donald Trump around climate change. And they actually said that a slight increase in temperature is actually better for food security. Have you got any comment on that, or any sort of scientific basis?
I'm not an expert in that field, so I can only say what I've heard, and that is that, first of all, in general, people do better in warmer climates than they do in cold climates. More people die of the cold than they do of heat. So warming up is generally more positive, and it's also true. Why do we have greenhouses? To increase the temperature of the crops that we're growing, to make them grow better.
Yeah.
Also in commercial greenhouses, by the way, they supplant the existing atmosphere with enriched carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide makes the crops grow better.
Yeah. So there's a direct correlation between our food security, and actually it's actually healthy if we have a little increase in temperature, because we're actually trying to manufacture that, like your garden where you've got the wall and it raised at 2 degrees.
Yeah.
The method behind that is that things grow better.
Exactly. If things grew better in a colder area, then I'd grow all my vegetables outside the walled garden.
Yeah.
So yeah, there we go. It's pretty self-evident, it's pretty axiomatic that warmer weather is better for plants than very cold weather.
Yeah, and I think that's the key for those watching is that actually you can almost do little tests on your own and just have a look at your own home and what you've got in your own environment and question it.
Yeah.
And that's the right thing to do. I don't like how the mainstream media try and instantly quash any sort of questioning or challenge. But I'm sure we'll come on to that. One of the things I wanted to come back to was we were talking about the where are we? Global average temperature. It's been claimed that it's risen by plus 1.2 degrees since the late 19th century. Now, you were saying earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we didn't actually have a mechanism to actually understand what the global temperature was, because that was we're taking it from satellites.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that you're arguing the other side, but where do you think that the basis for that argument has come from?
I don't know, is the answer. It may have well been from temperature measurement instruments that were placed on the ground and around the world, but the problem with taking data like that is that the areas that those temperature monitoring stations were located in have changed. Some have gone from a rural situation to an urban situation, which means that the local temperature is now different, whereas the global temperature may not have changed. So there are lots of problems with these averages taken before we had good satellite measurements. And even with the satellite measurements, as I've said before, averages are subject to all kinds of potential errors. Now, what do I believe? Do I believe that the climate is increasing in temperature slightly? Yes, I think it probably is. But again, we are so well within the normal range of this planet that there's nothing unusual in that.
Yeah, and it's fine, effectively.
It's fine. I mean, it was warmer during the medieval warming period. When the Romans occupied this land of ours, they were growing red grapes as far north as Yorkshire. I doubt that you do that successfully even today. So
that's why you have to pay so much for French wine.
That may be changing. But they weren't emitting much carbon dioxide during the Roman occupation, and it was definitely warm during the medieval warming period. Then temperature dropped, and we had the situation where during Victorian times people were skating on the Thames. And we're kind of recovering from that. The temperature's creeping up from where it was during the so-called mini ice age or little ice age. So I would suggest that there is nothing to be alarmed about. This is perfectly normal within the history of the planet, and the clever thing to do is not to try to change the climate, it is to adapt to it. As I think some of our vine growers are, and they're beginning to produce some red wine in this country now, which is palatable. Yeah,
I'm sure it will only improve over time.
It will only improve as the temperature keeps rising, but it won't forever. I mean, it will change back again, and it will go down again in the future. So enjoy it while we can.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things to back that up, I read this a few months ago now. Obviously, everything in the news up to a point was the polar ice caps are melting. They're melting, they've shrunk by, and I can't remember, you have to excuse me, but however many feet or whatever they measured it. A couple of months ago, I read that it had actually grown quite significantly. Did you see that, and what did you make of that revelation? Because it completely, for me, kiboshed the whole argument.
Yes, I mean, there have been a lot of scare stories about glaciers melting, ice caps melting, and so on.
Footage as well, showing them breaking off.
That's it. Very dramatic shots of huge pieces of ice breaking off. And I recall one where it was Julie Etchingham, actually, that I think was reporting on the western ice shelf of Antarctica melting. Well, that's been melting a long time. There have been volcanoes underneath it warming it up, so that's one of the reasons why it's melting. During that time, Antarctica was actually absorbing more ice, and it was actually getting cooler.
Mm-hmm.
So that was not really a piece of objective reporting, sadly. The situation again is, if we go back to the medieval warming period again, the Norse invaders of Greenland were growing barley. You can't do that right now, it's too cold. So it was warmer then.
Yeah.
It's got colder since, and it's warming up a bit now. Fine.
Thankfully, as far as I'm concerned.
Nothing to do with CO2 emissions or the lack of them.
Yeah, I certainly enjoy a nice 30-degree day. I don't know about you, and obviously you watching. I see it as a nice day. I see it as I'm getting the weather that normally I'd have to pay to go to Spain or somewhere on holiday to get. So I see it as a benefit. But the mainstream media, the fear tactic is, and there's famous images all over the internet that it used to be sort of 25 degrees was a sort of faint amber, just showing that it's warmer than blue basically. But now if you get a 25-degree day, it's like hell has risen. And it's that really, really deep, shocking red. I think the mainstream media are an absolute disgrace in how they portray this and use the scare tactics.
I agree. I think it's appalling. They are not reporting at all objectively, and they are cherry-picking data which supports their argument of anthropogenic climate change, and just cherry picking here and there. And the next thing, you see dramatic photographs of fires erupting in the Mediterranean area and things like that. And think, this is due to climate change. Well, actually, if you study the records, there have been worse natural fires in the past than there are now. There was a period during the 30s when we were a very high level of forest fires that did enormous damage. Then you get the claim that, but now the damage is much greater than it ever has been before, measured in pounds or dollars. Well, surprise, surprise, we've had a lot of inflation.
Yeah. And then again, it works though, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it only cost 200,000 back in the 1930s, but today it was $1 billion. But actually, I don't use those figures, but the inflation makes the numbers bigger naturally.
Absolutely.
And then it makes it scarier.
It makes it scarier. And it makes it sound as though things are much worse now than they were then, which is generally not true.
And if we're brutally honest, calm and steady doesn't sell.
This
Shock
is it.
and awe sells.
Yes.
Anything
Good
that you
news
can
doesn't
sensationalise.
sell.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so they need that extreme to sell their wares effectively across all the newspapers, and obviously to get viewers and things on the TV.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
I've got a couple more things to pick your brain on, and then obviously we've invited you on, so you'll then have free reign to go for it. But one of the most interesting stats when I was looking from the opposite side was that 97% of scientists support climate change. Now, I've heard things, but I can't substantiate them, that people were given grants and grant money for proving climate change. Well, if I got told, Mike, you're going to get 20 grand for proving climate change, then I'll go out and make something up that gets me. I wouldn't, because I'm not dishonest. But the point is, if you, it's the carrot and stick. If you give somebody that carrot and you want it bad enough, then you can do that. So obviously then there's the 3% of scientists that are effectively on our side. Now, I'd love to hear your views on why is that number so high, and what is it exactly that they're looking at?
Well, first of all, that 97% figure is very misleading. It came, I think, from a review paper which analysed something like 7,000 papers on climate change written in the scientific journals, and a very large number of those papers made no comment at all about what was causing climate change, the inference being that it was natural. Of the rest, a reasonably large number said that mankind has some effect on the climate. And I would agree with that. I think it'd be hard to say that with all the stuff that we're doing that we have zero effect.
Of course.
But that I would argue that the effect is negligible and is swamped by natural events and occurrences. So what it comes down to is that only around about 3% of the total number of papers that were reviewed indicated or suggested that mankind had a major impact on climate. So straight away the 97% goes to a much lower number. The other thing is that, the implication is that 97% of all scientists think that this is what's going on, and that's absolute nonsense. As I said earlier, there are at least 2 Nobel Prize-winning physicists that have come out and said that this is completely nonsense. There are thousands of PhD scientists around the world that have gone on record as saying that this is not true, that there is no climate crisis, that CO2 increases are actually beneficial, and it would be dangerous to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere because that would have an adverse effect on the food production.
Yeah.
So I hope that deals with the so-called 97% argument, which is not a valid number at all.
I think it does, but I also think it loops back to exactly what we were talking about previously around the mainstream media.
Cherry picking.
They cherry pick the most sensational thing, and then unfortunately we all believe it. Well, obviously not us, but a lot of people do, and then a lot of people become rightly passionate. If that's your belief, I understand why people are passionate about it. But when people only look at the top surface that they're being fed and don't do their own research and don't look into CO2.watch and have a look at a counter argument, then you're always going to believe your version of the truth rather than different perspectives, and then come to your own rational conclusion.
I agree entirely. Like, yes, Goebbels was right. You tell a lie often enough and people will believe it. The sad thing, I think, is that some people are really not equipped to understand the reality of the science. A lot of people, most people are, but can't be bothered. Mm-hmm. They're too busy doing other stuff, or they just can't. They just accept what they're told by the mainstream media. They think, well, if it's all over the mainstream media, it must be true, right?
It's the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
It's part of human nature.
It is, I've got other things to do, I haven't got the time to look into it, so I don't. But then there are, some of us that do look into it a bit further and find that there are huge flaws in those arguments, that scientifically it's impossible to support what they're saying. So then the question starts to arise, well, why are they doing this? In the end, your guess is as good as mine, but there must be a reason behind it, and I suspect that reason is not all that positive for us all, so we should resist it, I think, and focus on the truth. Let's get to the truth, stick to the truth, and let's not be misled by these mass media claims of apocalyptic climate change.
Yeah. As with anything in life, unfortunately, it's follow the money.
Yeah.
So the media are benefiting from it.
Yes.
Those that are trying to make changes into electric and the rest of it. There's money to be made out there from crisis.
There is a lot of money to be made, and you alluded, I think, earlier to the possibility that some people in research, in scientific positions in universities and so on, can be manipulated by grants and by the fact that if they write something which is against what the grant givers want, then they're not going to get it published, and so on. And there've been examples of that. So people tend to get motivated by keeping their job and getting paid and things like that. So there is that effect going on. And you're right, there is huge money behind this. And some very, very powerful and rich organisations are involved in all this. And yes, you're right. There's money to be made out of building wind turbines and solar panels and stuff.
And where the contracts go.
Well, they don't seem to be going much into the UK, do they?
Yeah.
You know, I think Siemens is one of the big producers of wind turbines, and the Chinese make most of the solar panels in the world. So they're probably happy about that. One other thing about CO2 is, even if you were to believe that CO2 is causing our climate to change and that we should stop emitting CO2 through our industrial processes, the UK only emits 1% of global industrial CO2. So whatever we do isn't going to make any difference. China emits 30%, the US about, I don't know, 13%, something like that. India 7%. Argentina emits more than we do. So absolutely nothing we could do would make any appreciable effect on the number of molecules of CO2 in the atmosphere, let alone climate change. But it's been estimated that reducing our emissions to net zero will cost £3 trillion by the National Grid's own estimates, and the government body, can't remember the name of it now, it's gone from me, but the budget responsibility, they, I think, calculated it was about half that, about 1.4 trillion. 3 trillion is equivalent to £40,000 for every man, woman and child in this country. Can we really afford 40 grand for that, each of us?
Absolutely not. And yeah, I'm sure Rachel Reeves will look down the back of the sofa and make another black hole and borrow more to get us closer to it. And I do appreciate that that's over, I think it's about 30 years, but regardless of timescale, and I may be incorrect on that figure, regardless of that, it's an eye-watering sum of money. And even if you put it over time, there's inflation and all the other things to take into consideration. That 3 trillion, a bit like the Chagos deal, it's going to be a lot bigger as it sort of comes to fruition. I'm
afraid so, and it's probably an underestimate. Think what that means globally. I mean, if we're producing 1% of CO2 and it's going to cost us 3 trillion to get back to net zero, then you can be pretty confident that it's going to cost 100 times that for the globe as a whole, probably more. And 300 trillion is going to wreak absolute havoc on the global population.
Yeah.
It will change our entire way of life.
Yeah, for the worse.
Absolutely.
Times are supposed to get better. You look back at Victorian times and workhouses and emptying your stuff out the top window. So things, yes, they have got better from that perspective. But during my lifetime, the heyday, I guess, was probably the 90s when I was a child, and certainly since I've been in my working life in the early 2000s, I've always felt, every time I get a promotion or a pay rise, I suddenly feel like I'm let down. My standard of living, it has got better over the last 22 years, but it hasn't got better to the point that it probably should do given professional achievements. And it is things like net zero that are one of the big factors, and they tax us by stealth as well, which I really don't like. It's the subsidies and just
Absolutely.
Taking bits.
We in the UK pay almost the highest amount of money for our electricity, which is a key source of our energy. If you think about what it takes to create wealth, it involves making stuff and selling it. To make stuff, you need capital, you need manpower, you need energy, and you need materials. Global material costs are fairly similar around the world. People are not going to take a pay cut, so our labour costs are not going to go down. The cost of capital isn't very different around the world. There are taxes, and of course Donald Trump's big on tariffs and stuff at the moment, which can affect individual transfers from one country to another. But the biggest impact on our ability to compete with our competitors around the world is energy costs.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at a big factory and anywhere in the world, you can say, why are people making stuff in China? Because their labour is cheaper. Well, it is cheaper, but go in the factory and see how many people are in there.
Yeah.
Most of the stuff's being done by automated machinery. So it's not so much the cost of labour, although it has some effect, but it's mostly the cost of energy to drive those machines. And if you've got cheap energy, you're competitive. If you've got expensive energy, you're struggling.
You have to pass on the cost.
You do,
It's
and
part of your
that
cost
way,
and your margin.
and then your margins are shrinking, and then you go out of business, potentially. So, if you've noticed, successive governments in this country have destroyed our coal industry. They've caused severe damage to our steel, aluminium, cement industries. They're not helping our automotive industries much, except through a few grants here and there to encourage foreign manufacturers to build cars over here. And they've now got the oil and gas industries in their sights to kill that off. What's going to replace this? The City of London does okay moving money around from one place to another, and those guys can make some serious bucks. But in the end, our status as a global economic power depends on our ability to compete across a range of industrial areas. And we've got this huge handicap at the moment of high electricity costs. And why are they high? Because we're subsidizing uneconomic so-called renewable power sources, particularly solar panels and wind turbines. Last winter, we almost ran out of our gas reserves because the wind wasn't blowing much and the sun wasn't shining much. And so we weren't generating much renewable power. And renewable in itself is a bit of a misnomer, because if you think about it, yeah, the wind might be renewable and the sun might be renewable, but those machines are not. Those big towers that hold the wind turbines are made of steel and concrete, and the blades are often made of fiberglass, and none of that gets particularly recycled. Certainly the fiberglass doesn't, and that's going to wear out after about 25 years.
Yeah.
So it's not really renewable.
It's not this government's problem either. If
No,
it's 25
because they won't be
years.
there in 25 years, that's for sure.
Exactly.
Hopefully reform will take over and sort that out. But anyway, good luck with that, because it needs sorting.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a great chat, but is there any other sort of key points, evidence, facts, statistics that you wanted to cover? I'll sort of hand the floor over. I'll still join in the conversation if appropriate, but we've brought you on here to talk about climate change and things. Over to you.
Okay, well, first of all, I would like to make it clear that I am not some lone lunatic. There are thousands of highly qualified scientists that are saying the same thing. There are also people from the climate change movement who have come clean as to what they actually believe. I mean, there's statements made by people within the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that this is not really about climate, it's about transferring money from the Western countries to the poorer countries, and whether or not that's a good idea, and so forth and so on. So it's actually sort of social engineering that's at the back of this, according to them. Maybe that's it, maybe it's something else, who knows. But certainly there's a rack of books there from some pretty serious scientific folk who've gone on record as saying that this is not correct, that CO2 is not causing catastrophic climate change, and that an approach to net zero will do very serious harm to the global economy, and will have a major and potentially devastating effect on people's ability to feed themselves. So for all those reasons, we need to get the message out that the stuff that you're being fed by the mainstream media is skewed. There's an agenda somewhere driving this. I could make some guesses, but I don't think that's appropriate. I'd rather not guess about conspiracy theories and the like, because I think that would taint the information. What I've stuck to is the facts. What I've given you is clear and information which can be checked and double checked. It's out there. It's in the scientific information libraries. You can find it. You can find, using Google and Wikipedia and so on, when the highest temperature was ever recorded on this planet, and it was a long time ago. All of these things point to the information that we've been talking about, that we are being fed misinformation. We should resist it, and we certainly should not allow our government to continue to destroy our industries with very high energy costs on the basis of an approach to net carbon zero. It's very, very damaging to our way of life. If you look back at wealth, and you talked a little earlier about the fact that you don't really feel much better off, although time is passing, and you feel like you should be feeling better off because you're progressing in life, and you should be earning more money, which I'm sure you are, but the money doesn't seem to be buying much more. And if you look at wealth per population over the past period that mankind's been around, you see that it stayed pretty constant all the way up to the Industrial Revolution. Yes, there were huge technological improvements and massive gains in knowledge, but what it took to do stuff was down to hard work by men and animals. It was horses that ploughed the fields with a single blade plough. It was people that had to do the washing in big tubs filled with water and over a fire made of wood, and so on. And it's only since the Industrial Revolution and the availability of fossil fuels that we have begun to develop machines to do all this work for us. Now we've got tractors with 6-blade reversible plows to do the plowing. Now we've got washing machines, we've got vacuum cleaners, we've got cars instead of horses and carts. We've got all of that stuff that we didn't have before that enables us to live a much better life and to have much more wealth than ever our ancestors had. Now, that's all down to the glory of fossil fuels. That's what gave us this increase in wealth.
Yeah, the boom.
The boom. Take them away and we go back to the early 18th century. They're not going to be with us forever. They are a finite resource, but there's enough down under the ground to last us for the next 250, 300 years, and we may discover more before it runs out.
That's really interesting because I keep hearing the counter arguments without a timescale. 250 to 300 years. Okay, I accept we need to be looking after I'd have great grandkids by then, or maybe even some more greats in there. Yes, we should be, in my view, looking at nuclear and other things because
sure, it will run out eventually, and so we have to be working on alternatives, and we are. I mean, we're working on nuclear power, we're working on hydrogen, but hydrogen we produce only by electrolyzing water, so that's more like a battery. It stores energy, it doesn't really produce it. We have to produce it using something else. Nuclear power may well be the long-term solution, and hopefully fusion nuclear power will come along at some stage, although the technological challenges there are huge. Nevertheless, we've mastered huge technological challenges in the past. But if we go more towards nuclear power, one of the interesting things, of course, is that if you build a nuclear power station, it costs almost as much to idle it as it does to run it.
Yeah.
So if you build, first of all, you have to have enough power available for when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining. So you have to have enough power available to fulfill our needs for power. And if we're all going to drive more electric cars and heat our homes with electricity rather than gas and oil, then we're going to need more electricity than we enjoy at the moment. So what do? Do we build enough nuclear power to supply our full needs when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining? Maybe we do. If we do, why bother with the wind and the sun? Because, as I said before, it doesn't cost much to run a nuclear power station once you've built it, compared with idling it.
And they're unsightly. Well, not the nuclear power stations, because they're localised to one place. Like
usually one.
Wind turbines.
Wind turbines are unsightly. They kill birds. They cause a lot of environmental damage.
Yeah. The solar farms.
Solar farms, acres destroy acres of good agricultural land. For what? I mean, a few nuclear plants and we could solve all that. But we don't have to do that right now. We've got 250 odd years worth of fossil fuels lying there under the ground waiting to be exploited, at least, maybe more. So it's a problem for our, as you say, our great-great-great-grandchildren, but we may be able to help them a bit by developing the technologies that they will need to apply.
But
we don't need to do it at scale at the moment.
Yeah.
We could just have a few pilot plants to demonstrate the technology, and then hopefully they'll be able to take it on from there.
Yeah, and the final point on that, I guess, is it's at the expense of the current generations, isn't it? All of this green
Absolutely,
stuff.
yeah. I mean, it's highly destructive to the current generation. I mean, we're seeing. Do you remember the Swedish girl Greta Thunberg, who was a sort of de facto leader of a youth movement? And one of her claims was that the current leaders were wrecking the future youth's future.
Yeah, that powerful.
It was a powerful message.
Yeah.
Actually, she is wrecking the youth's future by her attempt to get us to move towards net zero. That is damaging our youth far, far more than anything that we're doing. In fact, if we were to exploit those fossil fuels more and get our energy costs down, then the standard of life for you and your grandchildren would be improved. By going to net zero, it will certainly not be. They will face a bleak and tough future. And as it progresses, it will get more and more like life was, as I said, in the early 18th century, when we relied on animal and human power to do virtually everything. And interestingly enough, at that time, there were a few very rich people and a lot of poor people that served the rich people. I guess we could go back to that.
And I wouldn't be surprised. Arthur, I'm going to close with one final question.
Sure.
And I'm hoping that everyone at home has really enjoyed this and learned something from it. But if you wanted to dig deeper, viewers at home, is there a certain book or a certain author, scientist that you would recommend somebody to have a read and expand their knowledge on this topic?
Well, it's not particularly easy read necessarily, but I think the one that I would recommend most would be Unsettled by Steve Koonin. It's available, I think, from Amazon. Steve Koonin is currently a professor of physics at New York University. He's got an amazing CV. He was energy advisor to the Obama administration. He studied quantum physics under Richard Feynman at Caltech, and he got his PhD at MIT. So he's a very, very bright guy, and he writes very clearly, and he covers this topic in very great detail and uses the proper scientific method, and he completely demonstrates what egregious techniques have been used to try to persuade us that CO2 is causing unstoppable climate change. So I get no commission, I have to say, for promoting Steve's book, but if there was one book that I would recommend, it would be Unsettled by Steve Koonin.
Excellent. Right, Arthur, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully you have too. And yeah, I guess if you've got any questions that you'd like, please do put a comment in, and I can relay them if that's okay.
Absolutely.
To yourself, Arthur, and we'll get some responses back. But thank you everyone for watching. Hopefully there'll be more of these podcasts, and if you'd like to be a guest, drop us a note and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
And take a look at www.co2.watch.
Of course, definitely have a look. Thank you very much, everyone.